week's episode of Pokémon Generations, Team Galactic unleashes the fiery steel power of the legendary Pokémon Heatran. Even though this week's episode of Pokémon Generations featured a really badass legendary Pokémon, I think the real star of this episode had to be Looker's Croagunk. Who would have thought that Croagunk would be that badass? He was already a really popular character in the regular Pokemon anime series when he belonged to Brock. Just recently, over the course of the last month, he was revealed as a brand new playable character in Pokken Tournament, and in this week's episode, he brings all sorts of poisonous pain. In this episode of Pokemon Generations, Team Galactic member Heatran is trying to take control of Heatran, whose power cannot be contained, to the point where this thing is destroying absolutely everything in its wake. They're in the middle of this giant volcanic setting, which is already pretty damn cool and reminds me a lot of Mordor from Lord of the Rings. When they realize that they can't control Heatran's power, suddenly you have a trainer who appears from out of nowhere, who is popularly known as Buck. A very fiery trainer who makes use of Claydol, a very powerful psychic-type Pokemon, which, despite how powerful it is, Heatran makes quick work of this thing, when it hits it with one blast of a Fire Blast technique, sending it flying into a mountainside. It's freaking brutal and intense. I especially love the way that when Heatran attacks, its mouth sort of like opens up like a snake, like it unhinges its jaw before it unleashes this massive blast of fiery power. When suddenly, Croagunk appears, gets right into Heatran's face, and just decks him right in the forehead, which actually sends him flying back. This Croagunk is freaking awesome, and it hasn't even evolved into a Toxicroak. So Team Galactic has completely screwed up. They realize maybe we shouldn't mess with legendary Pokemon anymore, and it's up to Looker and Buck to save the day. I love the fact that Buck's Claydol actually manages to recover from that massive Heatran attack, and actually uses its psychic powers to lift up rocks that Buck jumps on in mid-air, picking up the Magma Stone and sealing away Heatran again. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Pokemon Generations? I'm glad that we got an episode with Heatran. Heatran has always been one of my favorite legendary Pokemon. I've always really loved the design of this creature. It's also one of the more unique legendary Pokemon in the sense that it can be both a male and a female, which is something you don't see that often attached to legendary Pokemon. Although it's kind of hard to tell if this one is a male or a female, all I know is it kicks all sorts of ass. It's also kind of funny that the sound effects that it makes are basically ripped directly from Jurassic Park. The Heatran in this episode sounds exactly like the Tyrannosaurus Rex from the Jurassic Park film series. Although I have to admit that roar is incredibly kick-ass and just makes Heatran seem all the more cooler in this episode. Overall, though, this was a pretty action-packed one. Almost from beginning to end, it was just a lot of cool Pokemon battling. And for me, personally, Croagunk is what really made this episode right here. It's funny that they're always able to take that level 1 Pokemon, never make him evolve, and he always seems even more badass as a Croagunk as opposed to a Toxicroak. I don't know what it is, it's just a perfectly designed poison-fighting frog Pokemon. I just love it. The Pokemon Generation series has been focusing on a lot of the famous legendary Pokemon from the series, and it looks like we're just wrapping up with Gen 4 as we move on to the 5th generation. I can't wait to see what they're going to do with those. As much as I love legendary Pokemon, I can't wait to see some more of the other ones from the series shine. This episode proves that they have the skills to pay the Pokemon bills. This week's episode was Heatran-centric, but the real star, in my opinion, was everybody's favorite poisonous frog, Croagunk. So check out this week's episode if you want to see some cool legendary Pokemon and some kick-ass Pokemon battles. That's what this episode was all about right here. It had some great production value, great use of sound, and it was just action-packed and a lot of fun. Let's face it though, if you're a hardcore Pokemon fan, you've already watched this episode. And I love this one, so I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. I absolutely love this one. But if any of you did watch the episode, make sure to tell me what you thought about it in the comments section below. Are you a fan of the legendary Pokemon Heatran? Are you a Croagunk or a Claydol fan? What did you think of this episode, and what other stories do you want to see from the rest of Pokemon Generations? Please tell me in the comments section below. If you guys have not seen this episode, I will put a link for it in the description box below, so make sure to check that out. Thank you guys so much for watching this review and discussion. I really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you'll be able to see all of our latest reviews and Pokemon videos and even our weekly podcast show. Make sure to like the video and leave me a comment or two. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time. And as always, stay dandy, baby.